That pesky photographer keeps trying to catch Kiss off guard. Ace and Peter are intercepted.
Hey, Kiss, look this way! Nuts!
Then he tracks down Paul at a restaurant.
Oh, shucks! Hey, Gene, over here! Darn!
But Kiss has the last laugh. Kiss Unmasked, the all-new album on Casablanca Records and 6. Kiss Unmasked. Available at Budget Tapes and Records.
It was 1980. Time for another album. Once we started working on Unmasked, it became clear that Peter's chemical problems had become major and that he needed some serious help. But he couldn't get that help within the context of the band. There was too much temptation, too many distractions, and he was causing all of us too much stress. We had a discussion with Vinnie Poncia, and he said, "Look, I don't want to use Peter on Unmasked. I want to use Anton Fig." Anton, who later became the drummer for David Letterman's Late Night Band, was a friend of Ace's, and he had appeared on Ace's solo album. He was also in a band called Spider that was managed by Bill Aucoin. Using Anton instead of Peter played into Ace's hands because it made him feel more in control. This was the kind of balancing act that Paul and I were used to. 1 year making Peter feel better about himself, the next year doing the same thing for Ace.
Man battle station torpedo. Man battle station torpedo.
I thought I'd go out and take a swim today. It was real hot and I just had to get away. They spotted an unknown soul down in the bay. But I don't care, think I'll go swimming anyway. Yeah! Let's take a dive, torpedo girl, and feel alive, torpedo girl. Let's take a dive, torpedo girl, and feel alive. Come on, get your feet wet.
The decision to use a different drummer on the album was just the first step in dealing with Peter. We honestly weren't sure what to do with him. He had been with the band since we started, and Kiss was an extremely loyal organization. Toward the end of the recording sessions, Poncia asked him to come in and add some harmonies on selected songs. They didn't go very well either. After the album came out, we were getting ready to go out on tour, and Bill Aucoin came by to talk. "Look," he said, "you guys have a tour to do. I don't want to get another drummer. Give Peter another chance." Peter had talked with Bill and Ace, and they agreed that he needed another chance. He wanted to come in and show how different he was. So we set up a meeting at SIR Rehearsal Studios in New York, and at the appointed time Peter appeared carrying a music stand, the kind that symphony orchestra players have, with a clip for the sheet music. He looked very serious and intense. Peter couldn't read or write music, not then and not now. None of us could. We were a self-taught rock band. But by that time he was so delusional that he thought if he had a music stand, he could convince us that he had changed. I'm surprised he didn't bring a baton. "You guys," he said, "I've completely changed my life around. I've been studying drums and music for the past 6 months, and I can read music. I'm completely better." I looked at the music sheets incredulously, and then at him. "Can you read and write music, Peter?" "Sure," he said, then mumbled something, but I couldn't make head or tail of it. Then we started playing, and he was worse than ever. So we had a meeting afterwards, and we said, "Peter is unhealthy. He's going to kill himself. He's got to leave the band and get some help." So after much deliberation, everybody, including Ace, voted him out of the band. To the press, we used the traditional rock and roll excuses: creative differences, desire to begin a solo career, and so on. We never said that Peter was thrown out of the band because he was a drug addict. We wouldn't have done that to him, to the fans, or to ourselves.
Early in 1980, Bill had to break the news to Peter that he was out. But instead, Bill persuaded the other 3 of us that we should give Peter a second chance. So we didn't finalize a decision, and after a few months, a period when we were off the road anyway, recording Unmasked with Anton Fig on drums again and Vinnie producing, we agreed to have Peter come back and try playing with us. In the interim, Bill had arranged for Peter to take drum lessons from Jim Chapin, a famous jazz drummer. The day of the audition, or rehearsal, or whatever you wanted to call it, Peter walked in carrying a music stand and sheet music. The first thing he said was, "I'll have to have all your songs on sheet music because I read music now." I whispered to Gene, "Are we on candid camera?" Peter sat down, put his sheet music on the stand, and studied it for a while. Mind you, this was a rehearsal of old material, not the new stuff we had written and recorded for Unmasked. We wanted to see whether he could even play the songs he already knew. The rehearsal did not go well. It was over. My philosophy had always been that if somebody was drowning, you tried to save the person, but when they started to pull you under, you cut them loose. That's what was happening. All the talking and advice and trying to get him help got us nowhere. We shot a video for the song Shandy after the decision to let Peter go had been confirmed. He came to the video shoot knowing it was the last time he would appear with Kiss. At the end of the day, he took his makeup case with him and left.
I just can't pretend no more. I keep running out of lies. Loving you is killing me inside. Every time I find the words to end it, something in your eyes won't let it. Shandy.
It wasn't tearful, but it was a big moment. Peter was leaving. We had fired him, and this was the last time we were going to see him in the band.
We say goodnight and go home.
He was likely in his own drug haze and saw this as his big opportunity. In his mind, he wrote the biggest song we ever had, and now he was free to go out and become the big star he should be. Wow, Peter's gone. It's the end of something. But the end of what? It was difficult to envision the band not being the four of us. Dysfunctional or not, we were the Four Musketeers. It was a scenario we had never contemplated. What if somebody no longer wanted to be there? What if somebody was no longer doing his job? Whatever tension there was inside the band, we had always remained a band. Then all of a sudden, one person was no longer part of the band. It shook all of us to the core. What do we do? Do we break up the band? The rules had changed. Kiss clearly wasn't going to continue as it had.
We're talking today with Peter Criss, formerly a member of the group Kiss. And today you won't get a chance to see his face, but expect to see that very, very soon. Hello,
Hi.
Peter.
How you doing?
I'm doing just fine.
It's good to see you.
Tell me, first of all, how does it feel to be away from the group after being with such a successful group for such a long period of time?
I miss the boys, I really do, but I'm extremely happy these days because I think 10 years, I mean, if the Beatles could break up, you know, I could leave something, and I love the Beatles.
Right.
And leaving the band, I thought about it for at least 3 years now. I mean, it wasn't an overnight decision for me. And it was long coming since when I wrote Beth, and I felt so proud of having a #1 record. It kind of gave me a lot of initiative to say, well, man, I'd like to do more of that. And I was kind of being held back in a sense as an artist of not having my fair share of abuse, I call it. And I just didn't get enough tunes, and it was getting really frustrating for me. And towards like the last tour, we did something like 90 shows in 6 months. And I said that, you know, after I got married, one of my honeymoon, I was in Brazil, and I said, that's it, you know, I just can't do that no more. I'm really trying. It's not fair for them or myself to go up there, and it's not fair to the audience. I'm not giving, I called it 110. And I told the guys when I got back, and they were shocked, and they felt bad. And they said, is that what you really want to do, Peter? And I says, look it, man, I played for 60,000. I'm as people, and I'm, as far as financially, I'm very comfortable. And it's not the money, guys. It's the music. I'm really hurting as an artist, and it's I got to break out, and I gotta try my own thing. And if I don't do it now, I don't want to ever think back and go, God, could I really have made it on my own talent? You know, was I really that good to get a People's Choice Award or be up for 2 Grammys? So that's what kind of gave me the incentive to split.
As the drama with Peter was unfolding during the first half of 1980, we were also involved in a drama with our record label. Casablanca was absorbed by Polygram, and for some reason, the lawyers of the new company hadn't checked Casablanca's contracts with a fine-tooth comb. Polygram assumed they were buying Kiss and Donna Summer along with the label, but we had a key man clause, meaning that in our case, the deal was predicated on the presence of Neil Bogart. And from what we heard, the same was true of Donna. Now, we may have been in some decline after Dynasty if you gauge things by the tour, when we'd had to cancel some shows and witness the changing demographics of the audience. But the way Polygram saw it, Dynasty had been a huge hit, and in addition to making the charts at home, I Was Made for Lovin' You had been our most successful single outside the United States by far, hitting the top 10 all across Europe and topping the charts in Australia and New Zealand. The label risked looking like idiots if they let us walk away, which we were entitled to do once they canned Neil. The situation could not have worked out better for us. Polygram ended up giving us a new and very lucrative deal as a face-saving move. Negotiating a new contract under these disastrous circumstances for them proved extremely advantageous for us. The truth was that up to that point we hadn't made much money, particularly if you compared what came in with what came to us. We found out later that Kiss brought in about $100 million in merchandise sales in the 3 years between 1977 and 1979. Of that, the band members together took home less than $3 million. The overheads of Bill's operation were eating our lunch. But again, at that point, we still didn't know enough about business to realize it.
All the victims have turned to stone. No one is happy. They're all alone. I sacrifice my social position tonight. In New York, millionaires and lonely people with lonely stares. I'm not looking for love, and I'm lost in this night. In the naked city, there are 10 million stories. I'm not looking for pity. In this naked city.
By 1981, my relationship with Cher had changed. We were still seeing each other, but we had moved on. Even though its shape had shifted, the relationship had changed me permanently. Up through my late 20s, I had been dead set against anything and anyone getting in my way. I wanted to be completely selfish because in some ways I wanted to be fair and not start something I wouldn't finish. A lot of men get in relationships, have children, and then walk out, like my father. I didn't want to become my father.
It's a race with the devil. On the brain of the sorrow. Is there not tomorrow? In the naked city. Naked city.
Then came the relationship with Cher, and it hit me like a truck. I was so taken off guard that I started doing everything I thought I wouldn't normally do. I wore shorts, I pulled my hair back. I allowed myself to be happy in simpler ways, with simpler things. When Cher and I decided to change things, there was no pain or anguish because neither of us had tortured the other. From what I've seen, so many relationships are based on intense extremes of love or hate. The first phase is all about love and devotion. This feeling that you would do anything for the other person. Then things go wrong, and couples become venomously vengeful, and anything and everything is fair game. That wasn't the way Cher and I were, ever. When it began to end, I remind myself how wonderful she was and how lucky I had been to have known her, and prepared to go back to my whoring ways. The last thing I expected was to meet another woman and start another serious relationship. It was Christmas time, and I had to return to New York from California to audition new drummers to replace Peter.
Once I was a fool, dreaming my life away, and then yesterday I found you, looking for me, dragging your heart around, out of lost and found. I love you. You're the only one who could make me feel I was smart. I feel you deep inside of me, beating up against my heart. And I found out what makes the world go round. Oh, I found out, really found out what makes the world go round.
I was talking to Cher, because we were still close, and she asked me to get her a Christmas present. I don't know what to buy you for Christmas, I said. Go and talk to my friend Diana. She'll show you what I like. We shop at the same places. This was Diana Ross, who had begun her career with the Supremes, become not only Motown's biggest star, but one of the biggest stars in the world, and then had gone on to an immensely successful solo career, both in music and in movies. She was more than a singer. She was an icon. When I came into New York, I tracked down Diana on the phone, and she invited me over to her place. I remember coming in and immediately thinking two things about her. First, that she was very sensual, and second, that she was in firm control of her career. At that point, she was taking steps to leave Motown, and she seemed to know a lot about her career. I sat there and we talked. She wanted to know how Kiss worked, since our success didn't rely on hit singles. I tried to explain our philosophy of playing concerts and creating a fan base that was founded on loyalty, not on hit singles. This was the polar opposite to the kind of career Diana had built, but I could tell that it interested her and she wanted to understand it better. Being in Kiss afforded me the opportunity of an inexhaustible supply of beautiful girls who simply wanted to be with me, perhaps only because I was in Kiss. And the only thing they wanted was what I wanted too. Society's rules didn't apply in my hotel room, or on the bus, or wherever I would have liaisons. In another environment, a girl might first want to get to know a prospective suitor and be taken out to dinner. Inside my bedroom, it was clearly wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. No, what does it all mean sermon, no dinner, just dessert. And they didn't mind sharing. The more the merrier. If I took one of these ladies with me for a week, it would start beautifully, but within a few days it would become clear that lust is one thing, companionship another. I wanted not only to bed a beautiful girl, but I also wanted to talk to her. I wanted her to have something to say back to me, to disagree with me, to give me a run for my money. Well, let's not go that far.
She walked in like a lady with a glass of big champagne. I wouldn't look if you paid me, 'cause to me, she's still the same. Well, you wanna see her wearing her heart on her sleeve. You'd never believe her. She's got a well-planned look
If I was in the studio, she would wait for me. If I wanted to go someplace, she would want to go there too. Now, mind you, this sounds like the kind of situation any guy would dream of. But aside from the joys of having some young, lusty girl share my bed, the waking hours tended to grow stale with her. There was a constant pull and tug inside of me. On the one hand, I craved and clearly loved being in bed in the arms of a beauty, but I also loved to cuddle. I always wanted to be with girls, but I didn't want them to want me. Not too much, at least. Life should be about choices, and only I was going to choose what was right for me. The only problem was that by the time I met and fell for Diana Ross, I had started to like the idea of having children. I didn't admit it to myself, not then, but I remember walking into Diana's home in Connecticut and feeling the love she and her 3 girls shared. I liked being there. It felt safe. I was surrounded by children. I was living with a woman I loved being with night and day. But they weren't my children, and we weren't married. Being with Diana was liberating. She didn't need me to fulfill her life. She was a mother and a superstar. We were together because we wanted to be. I brought Diana and the kids over to my mother's house for Passover dinner. We spent one summer together at Martha's Vineyard. It was the first time I didn't think about work. Not all the time, anyway. The guys in the band thought I was completely insane by now. I was. I was the guy in the band who was constantly on the hunt for skirt. But here I was settling into domestic life. For the second time.
Now that we suddenly had a chunk of money from the new record deal, I decided I wanted to buy an apartment instead of continuing to rent. You didn't get anything out of renting, you didn't build equity, so in a case like mine, it was pointless. At first, I wanted to look at places overlooking Central Park along Fifth Avenue. When I explained this to a real estate agent, she said to me, "I can take you to the places you want to see, or I can take you to the places that will let you in." "What do you mean?" I asked. She started talking about nouveau riche and about being an entertainer. She paused. Then she said the buildings along the park were owned by blue bloods and old money. She might as well have said, "You're a Jew," which I would learn was indeed unspoken grounds for being rejected by many of the prime buildings I was interested in. My agent had been through this before and knew the situation all too well. "You mean I can't live where I want?" She explained the system of co-op boards. In New York City, most buildings were jointly owned by all the inhabitants, and a board created by the joint owners had to approve any new buyer. It was different from condos where you just bought the unit from the previous owner. Co-op boards could and did block applications to buy from people they didn't want in the building. Jews and blacks were often those people. Eventually, I settled on a place on 80th Street and Madison Avenue, 1 block from Central Park and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I finally owned my own shelter, my home, my sanctuary, my refuge. It felt very different from renting. One day I was paging through Penthouse magazine, and I liked the look of the woman on the cover. I called Bill Aucoin's secretary and said, "Find her." A few days later, she was in that massive tub with me. Cliché or not, there we were with a bottle of Dom Perignon. Not long after, my mom asked me whether I was seeing anyone special. I smiled and told her to pick up the most recent Penthouse. Needless to say, she was speechless at some of the very revealing shots. I still had just one ear and was deaf on one side. I still shrank back in social situations. I didn't know what was going to happen with my band, which was the only support structure I knew. Now what? The neighborhood around my new apartment had quite a few shops and galleries specializing in Art Nouveau antiques. I had liked colorful Tiffany glass lamps since I was a kid. My parents used to buy old furniture at junk shops and refinish it. Some of it they kept, some of it they sold. And over our dining room table at home hung a glass lamp. It was just an ice cream parlor lamp, but people called any colored glass lamps Tiffany lamps back then. When I moved up near the Metropolitan, I spent time enjoying the museum's collection of real Tiffany glass. One day as I walked past the Macklowe Gallery in my neighborhood, a Tiffany lamp in the window made me stop in my tracks. I still didn't have any furniture in my place beyond the bed and my vintage guitars hanging in the glass-fronted cases lining the wall of the music room. but I went into the gallery to see the lamp up close. The price tag said $70,000. I bought it on the spot and carried it the 2 blocks home. When I got home, I put it down in the middle of the empty living room on the wall-to-wall carpeting and plugged it in. I lay down on the floor and stared at it for hours as the sun set and the stained glass glowed brighter in the gathering darkness. Here I was in my own place with this beautiful lamp. Life is grand. I became intoxicated by the idea that I could buy whatever I wanted. Maybe buying fancy things can make me happy. I would stroll Madison Avenue, see a pair of shoes in a shop window, and ask, "How many colors do they come in? Just give me all of them." I was draping the scared little boy inside me in another image, projecting a big persona with a shell of fine clothes. Once I wanted to go into a jewelry store that had Rolex watches displayed in the window. At first, they wouldn't buzz me in the locked door. Then, after they finally did, they were rude and condescending. After looking around for a little while, I pointed to a watch and asked, "How much is this one?" $20,000, said the salesman, looking down his nose at me. I pulled out my wallet. By this time, we had that kind of cash in our personal accounts and counted out that much in front of him. Then I said, "Guess what? I'm not buying it. You shouldn't treat people like that."
Just a Boy. A new member meets the elders. 1980, 1982. 80, we started to look for a new drummer. Auditions were held in downtown New York City. Hundreds of people auditioned. Finally, we got in this guy who was a stove cleaner in White Plains, New York, whose name was Paul Caravello. Paul answered one of the ads, and I'll never forget his audition. He came in and he had the biggest head of hair I'd ever seen. He almost looked like a Muppet. And he was shorter than any of us. Peter had been the shortest too, but Paul was even shorter, maybe 5'5". Still, he was great from the start, cute as a button, with a heart of gold. At the end of the audition, he actually got up, thanked us, and said, "Before I leave, can I have your autograph?" It struck us all, even Ace, as being a sweet thing. He wanted this break so badly, in such a pure way. While working as a stove cleaner, he'd been in bands on and off, and was actually a much better drummer than Peter, and sang with good pitch. He was an all-around better thing for Kiss than Peter was at that point. Once he left the audition, we immediately decided he should be in the band. We called him up and offered him the job, and he couldn't believe it. We changed his name from Paul Caravello to Eric Carr, and we even went out and bought him a Porsche so he wouldn't feel substandard. We wanted him to know that he was in the fold, that he was one of us. Bringing Eric into the band the way we did, just before a tour, with very little preparation and tons of enthusiasm, was like living the beginning of our careers all over again. It was an astonishing thing to watch him take on his new role, and to watch ourselves try to integrate him. First, there was the matter of his personality within the band. What was his character going to be? What was his makeup going to be? Was he going to be an elephant or a giraffe? For an ordinary band, his personality might not have been an issue. For Kiss, it was an issue times 10. For a while, we decided that Eric would look like a hawk, but later he came up with a fox persona. We introduced him by playing at the Palladium in New York City to a crowd of about 3,000 people. That was the trial of fire, and he passed with flying colors. Then we went off to Europe, taking Bon Jovi on their first European tour. Everything was brand new for Eric. He was wide-eyed as we started our European tour, and not used to the kind of fame we were experiencing. One night we were in a hotel in England, and he was downstairs in the bar. There were girls there, as always. One of them introduced herself as a photographer for Melody Maker, a British music industry paper. Eric talked to her for a while and gave her the complete new rock star rap. At one point, he asked her if she wanted to come up and take nude pictures of him. She said sure. So they went up, and apparently he had told her, "Look, these pictures are just for you." She said that she understood completely. Eric got into a bathtub nude, holding a champagne glass, with shades on, and this big mop-top head of hair. Apparently, they didn't spend the night together. After she took the pictures, she took off. The next day, Eric related the story to us. We doubled over laughing. It was like Trust on the Road 101. "Are you out of your mind?" we said. "This girl is going to print those photos." Eric protested for a second, but then the truth dawned on him. "Oh, my God," he said. "You think she will?" Of course she did. Everywhere we went with Eric, he was just like that. He was never malicious. He worked hard. He showed up on time. He was a complete professional. But there was constant comedy because he was so inexperienced and trusting. At one of the airports in Europe, he showed up in a camouflage outfit with an ammunition belt around him. All the bullets were hollow, but it wasn't immediately apparent, and at any rate, it wasn't the kind of thing you brought to an airport. So, of course, some of the machine gun-toting security guards at the airport took him off to the side. That's how much they didn't trust him. They thought he was wearing a wig because his hair was so big. "What's under there?" they asked. I mean, they really went from top to bottom. He even had an anal inspection. He was protesting all the way. "What are you talking about? I'm from White Plains." While Peter had complained constantly, Eric was more than fun to have around. He was terrific.
I've been your lover for too many years. I'm through with wasting my time. You've been out running without any fear. Tell me why. I wanna know the reason why. 'Cause it's easy as it seems. I keep on hearing your road never bends. You ain't committing no crime. I hear you sleeping with one of my friends. Tell me why. I wanna know the reason why. 'Cause it's easy as it seems. When you're walking out on your dreams, you just walk away.
Unmasked tanked in the States, and we spent most of 1980 inactive. We didn't have a drummer anyway. The single Shandy was a hit abroad, however, and we booked a tour of Europe and Australia for the fall. But before we could play live, we needed a drummer. Auditioning people was very strange. We didn't want big-name drummers. We wanted somebody to come out of nowhere. It wouldn't have made sense to have Anton Fig or some other known commodity dress up as a black and silver giraffe or whatever. Bill placed a cryptic ad in some music magazines, and we also spread the word. Bill started to get tapes and photos and bios and lots of phone calls. He went through the materials, and we periodically invited groups of potential replacements he had filtered to audition with us. We decided we didn't want a drummer who played like Peter. The ones who made the best impression on us played what you might call English. They played on the backbeat, and whether they were playing double bass drums or not, they revered the same bands we did. Peter had enough trouble keeping time on a single bass drum and snare, so the idea of him playing two bass drums was out of the question. It wouldn't have made sense in the context of what we were doing anyway. Using a double bass drum in rock came about as a way to emulate what John Bonham of Led Zeppelin managed to do with one bass drum. His foot was so fast that it took most drummers two kick drums and both feet to mimic it. We didn't set out to find someone with a double kit, but we also didn't want to impose boundaries or limitations on a new member. As long as we were getting somebody new, we figured we should be willing to move forward. One guy who auditioned was a little stove repairman from Brooklyn named Paul Caravello. He was tiny with a huge head of hair and no airs or attitude. The first thing he did was ask us for our autographs. At first, I wasn't blown away by his playing, but everyone else in the room, including Vinnie Poncia and Bill Aucoin, thought he was great. We brought the guy back for a second time, and he turned out to have a good voice with the same raspy quality Peter had. He was also a quick learner. We had found our guy. Paul wanted to change his name, and we wanted him to change it too. We didn't need three Pauls in the band since Ace also shared that name. His first suggestion was Rusty Blades, which we vetoed quickly. Thankfully, the name game was short-lived when his second suggestion was Eric Carr, a name that sidestepped any obvious cartoon rock star moniker. He seemed like a good soul. Some of the other people who auditioned had acted like rock stars, thinking they would gain points for that. Eric was sweet. He eventually proved to be tortured in his own way, but he certainly was a much-needed breath of fresh air in the wake of Peter's departure. He had told us stories about repairing stoves, going to an apartment and opening up stoves to find all kinds of bugs and beasts crawling around inside. And we wanted him to know he wouldn't be a second-class citizen in KISS. So once we told him he was in the band, we did two things to welcome him. First, we bought him a silver Porsche 924. I somehow became the guy who was supposed to watch over him and groom him, teach him. He approached me after he got the car. "Can I have it painted camouflage?" "Absolutely not," I said. I didn't think he should take a sleek imported sports car and turn it into a circus mobile.
Okay, now newest member, Eric Carr.
Eric Carr.
First of all, have to audition to be the fourth member of KISS. Seriously.
Well,
When you
I'll
have
tell
to face these guys, especially Ace.
No, actually, I was really quite positive about the whole thing, and I was really excited. I just went in there, and I knew I was going to do my best, and I really relaxed. The guys were really great to me. They really were.
And he was great to us.
We gave him milk, milk and cookies, and a little dog food.
Eric was so good. I mean, for the first week, though, he did have to wear diapers.
Then I took him shopping at a place called the French Jeans Store. They sold, surprise, French jeans. I helped him pick out a new wardrobe. He'd need it since we were leaving for a European tour soon. It took some time to figure out a character for Eric. Heaven forbid we put him in a character people already knew. That seemed too obvious to us, and maybe sacrilegious. Originally, he was going to be the Hawk. We had a costume built with a protruding chest and feathers all over it. He painted a beak on his nose, but he looked like the mascot for a high school football team. All that was missing were the big foam chicken feet. It was horrible. Fortunately, he came up with the idea of the fox. He wore the same size boots as Peter, so we used existing boots and had the platforms built up even more. The boots ended up being like stilts, and he still looked tiny next to us. Eric got thrown in at the deep end of the pool. We had become comfortable dealing with the world we operated in. Basic stuff, like handling women's sexual advances and the media, or acting properly in a restaurant. Eric had to learn on the fly. The second night of the tour, on August 31st, 1980, in Genoa, Italy, we heard a commotion outside the locker room that was serving as our dressing room at the sports arena where we were playing. Then we started to hear people chanting. "KISS fascista! KISS fascista!" Security started screaming, "Lock the doors!" Baseball bats started pounding on the door and smashing things outside. They wanted to kill us. It was bad enough that we were going to get killed for playing music, but worse still that I was apparently going to die in platform boots and makeup. We consciously avoided espousing any political views, and yet, to them, we represented all the evils of American capitalism. That was the first tour where people asked us about politics. Europeans' way of thinking seemed more tied into politics and world events. Gene took any opportunity to be seen or heard. His Achilles heel is his need for attention, regardless of the source of the attention. I had no intention of making political statements. At the end of the day, Love Gun wasn't about guns. I was just singing about my dick. We had fun messing with Eric on that tour. It was like having a little brother around. One nickname we came up with for him was Bud Carr Rooney, because we joked that he looked like the love child of Buddy Hackett and Mickey Rooney. The first night we were in Paris, Eric wore a brand new white suit to dinner, his first. Not 10 minutes into the night, he spilled a huge glass of red wine all over it. At times like that, he would close his eyes and mutter, "What a schmuck." He sent that suit to the cleaner so many times, hoping against hope the stain would come out, that when it finally came back white, the sleeves fell off when he put the jacket on. He was impressed that we could get by on a little pidgin version of the local language on that first tour across Europe. In Paris, he decided he wanted to try. "How do you ask for butter in French?" "Well," I said, "s'il vous plaît is please, and what you want is fapouge." The French word for butter is beurre. I made up the word fapouge. The waitress came over to our table and Eric said, "Fapouge, s'il vous plaît." She looked at him and said, "Fapouge?" He did this thing we used to call the Ronald Reagan, where his head would start to shake from side to side when he got nervous. He did that now. Fapouche, he repeated with his head shaking. Another night, he really liked the food we'd had, which had come on a sizzling hot plate. Eric was still like Oliver Twist in those days. "Please, sir, may I have some more?" The waiter brought another searing hot plate, carrying it with tongs, and Eric reached up and grabbed it with his bare hands. You could hear the tss sound as it singed his fingers. He just closed his eyes and said, "What a schmuck." Another night in France, a guy at a nightclub started hitting on Eric, making him uncomfortable. He went over to Ace and said, "That guy over there is trying to come on to me." Ace, in his inimitable logic, said, "Let's make out so he thinks we're together. Then he'll leave you alone." And the kissing began. Armed military personnel guarded the airports in some parts of Europe back then. One time, at an airport where security had AK-47s, Eric got pulled aside. He was wearing a camouflage jumpsuit and bullet belts. They took him through a door and out of our sight, but he was back surprisingly quickly. "What happened?" we asked. "I told them I'm a musician," he said, "so they took me to another room and had me play a piano. Once he played a little piano, they let him go." Though Eric was 2 years older than me, he seemed like a kid. His life experience had been limited and he was naive and gullible. One night in England, he took a female journalist to his room from the hotel bar where we were all hanging out. The next day, we asked him what happened. "Well, we talked, and then she wanted to take some pictures of me without my clothes on," he said. "What?" I said. "She said she wouldn't print them. Are you crazy?" "Oh shit, did I do something wrong?" "You let her take pictures." "But she said they were just for herself." Sure enough, when the next week's issue of the Journalist magazine came out, there was Eric looking like an idiot, naked in the bathtub with his huge head of hair and a glass of champagne. He closed his eyes. What a schmuck. The atmosphere in the band was much better without Peter's constant negativity to contend with. It was eye-opening what a difference it made. We had alleviated such a huge problem and so much uncertainty, strife, and hostility. It was as if the sun had suddenly come out, and that was only Peter. Ace was still in a downward spiral, but at least now we had half as much turmoil. Ace had lost an ally, but he hadn't lost a buddy. Whatever relationship he'd had with Peter was strictly mercenary. Ace was smart, and he manipulated Peter to help him vote for things he wanted. If he missed Peter at all, it was on that level, not as a friend. Now it was me and Gene and this other guy who didn't have the same seniority or power as a full member. Ace was the odd man out as far as the decision-making process. I knew it bothered him, but it wasn't an immediate issue while we were on tour. When we arrived in Australia for the first time in November 1980, it quickly became clear that things were going to be crazy. We'd been told KISS was massive there, but you never know what to expect. You can only comprehend things you've already experienced. Australia was like nothing we'd ever experienced. Huge here meant not being able to leave the hotel. It meant taking a helicopter from the hotel to the stadium we were playing. The phenomenon we witnessed became known there as Kissteria. We had an entire floor of the hotel with one suite devoted to our own Australian public relations staff. And no wonder, since we were on the front page of the newspapers every day, accompanied by headlines like "Kiss and Midnight Cruise on Sydney Harbor." We had to keep the curtains drawn in our rooms. The place was crawling with bodyguards, and there was a constant drone of screaming outside. "You're not going anywhere," we were told. Thankfully, Australia had its own Penthouse magazine, and a number of Penthouse pets came over to the hotel to keep us company. Paparazzi camped in front of the hotel, and whenever we went anywhere, we had to hide on the floors of vans. Every single night, the promoters threw parties which were packed with models and actresses. Some parties were women only. We would show up at a club or ballroom that had been taken over, and the place would be filled with beautiful women. Australia was one giant chicken coop. Eric, however, would often leave the parties and go out and befriend some waif he met on the street. He identified with the fans. Maybe he felt more like them than like one of us at that point. He sometimes brought girls to his room who had been camping outside trying to catch a glimpse of the band. For his comfort, he chose women like that over models and penthouse pets. Issues shape personalities. The first hints of Eric's trouble started to come out too. One day he rented a car and driver to spend a day in the countryside with a girl he'd met. He was so nervous, he told us, that he got awful gas and had to stop the car every 10 minutes to go to the bathroom. He was depressed afterwards about what an idiot he felt like. He also went on about how he was losing his hair. His hair was so big that when he moved forward, it moved backwards. It was always moving in the opposite direction from the rest of him. And yet he constantly wanted me to look at his head. Look, is it thinning here? And strangest of all, Eric struggled with the idea that he wasn't the original drummer of the band. I didn't understand it. I mean, of course he wasn't the original drummer. He was the second drummer. So what? There was no talking him out of his funk when he started obsessing over the fact that he would never be the first drummer.